Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with VC Andrews. Yep, today for another round of old versus new. We're going to Roadhouse. Never heard of this, to be honest. I got nothing. I mean, frankly, you never heard of it, but who knows? After this, I might check it out. So, without any further ado, how about we hop in? Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Here we go. Let's check out Roadhouse. Oh, hey man. You okay? I pitch. Ouch. Yeah, that might be his mic. I don't know. I'll have troubles with that sometimes. The gayest voice. Ouch.
And to think, after 8 years in a customer service job, 8 out of 10 customers still think I'm a woman over the phone.
Does it?
Well, guys,
I don't know.
My New Year's resolution, I think it's time to finally set things straight with you once and for all.
I am a man.
And I say it's about damn time you guys realize that. I may have been a little feminine as a kid. Okay, maybe more than a little feminine. But this is the review that's going to prove you that I am a big, tough man. And now it's time for my big, tough guy makeover. Wait, that sounded bad.
You think?
Now it's time to dress like a tough guy.
The wind is blowing through her hair. We like to head out on the road. And you know we don't really care. Cause we're just doing what we want. She likes it when I treat her good. She likes it when I treat her bad. She likes to travel all around. I take her everywhere and back.
Eat your effing heart out, Dwayne Johnson. And now I'm off to the only place where I can film while reviewing the most masculine movie I know of.
And that movie/location is simply known as Roadhouse. And I've selected the perfect music for the lead into this badass movie. A rock cover of Bear in the Big Blue House.
It's about a young man named James Dalton, or Elwood Dalton in the remake.
And most people call me Dalton, sir.
Apparently tough guys can't have the same name as Arthur Reed's hometown, who happens to have the fighting skills of Miyagi, Liam Neeson, Master Shifu, Jackie Chan, and Tom Cruise all in one. So this lands him a high-paying job as the head bouncer in an out-of-state roadhouse that's suffering regularly from brawls of the customers, the other bouncers sometimes getting a bit too physical, and said bouncers goofing off on the job, shall we say, sometimes in drug-related ways. So Dalton comes in and pretty much says,
I know you're used to loosey-goosey, but I run a much tighter ship.
And he means it too, quickly firing any bouncer for funny business or overly brutal force, and seems able to stop a brawl going on in his turf with just 1 or 2 punches. His new boss loves the order that Dalton's bringing to his establishment, and a slightly messier brawl stand-in results in him meeting a very awesome chick doctor at the hospital. But not quite everyone is pleased with Dalton being in town. See, a cruel crime boss is set on getting his greedy hands on the roadhouse, and Dalton, laying down the law effectively in the place, seems to be endangering those chances. So he's got some dirty tricks up his sleeve, some of which include getting rid of our hero. Is Dalton really a match for our villain? Need one ask? True. So the plot of this movie sounds like something out of a Western. You're right. Roadhouse is basically a gunman Western film set in modern times, but with a barroom instead of an entire town.
Makes
sense. I mean, I guess there is still technically a whole town bar in both versions, but well, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
I've got to say though, the original Roadhouse has a very mixed reputation. Some think it's a masterpiece that revolutionized action films. Some think it's just 2 hours of sleazy sex and violence. Some think it's so bad it's good with its implausibility. But most people can't agree that it's got some really
action movies. You gotta have that implausibility.
Cast. The remake has a similar mixed reaction. Some think it's a good update to the fun, cheesy cult classic, while others find it just stupid or not quite as campy as the original. As for me personally, I think both movies are just alright on the whole. Definitely not the best action or even corny movies I've seen, but with just the right amount of hammy performances, hilarious implausibility, and some kick-ass action scenes, they do still make for some pretty decent action flicks. But I will say that these are definitely 2 of the most masculine films I've ever seen, so before I can venture into the magical world of Amphibia with my next review, I need to review something that will hopefully establish my reputation as a macho guy. Oh, speaking of Amphibia, Keith David, the voice of King Andreas in that show, and the voice of the Shadow Man, has a cameo in the original as a bartender. So why don't you pour yourselves a couple shots of whiskey as we examine the 2 versions of the film that literally became Peter Griffin's catchphrase. This is old versus new, the
Roadhouse.
You gotta love it. Well, I don't think, hate to say it, I don't remember Peter going Roadhouse. Just God, what are you gonna do? So yeah, an action movie I've never seen. Patrick Swayze. I might have to find some time to watch it. You know, I mean, heck, sounds like a rolling time. And also, the bouncer having to stop the fights and lay down law. I mean, sure, that's supposed to be the owner, but you know, the bouncer's got to be the enforcer. I mean, if you've seen Bar Rescue enough times, you know the drill. If it's too rowdy, bye-bye business. Anyway, let's begin.
There are 3 locations I consider the most lawless on Earth. A western town, a bar room, and my family dining room table when I'm learning to play euchre for the first time. And any one of those locations needs a badass deputy to keep things in order. Or if it's in a movie setting, like handsome, charismatic, funny, and able to kick the ass of Chernobog without breaking a sweat. But which version here is more likely to break the necks of those who insulted my voice? I mean, be the best barroom bouncer overall. Sure. Well, grab your whiskey and strap your boots as we take a look at Best Dalton. May the best bouncer win.
Go, Dalton.
Even though I never really dug either movie, I freaking love the character of Dalton. This dude is just about everything you could want in an action movie lead. He's suave, handsome, charismatic, and has a good sense of humor, though if you give him any funny business at all, you might expect to have a broken funny bone for life. Yeah, to say this dude's overqualified to be working as a bar bouncer is like saying a city power generator is overqualified to charge an electric toothbrush. This dude needs to be in the highest ranks of the FBI or the military with the combat skills that he possesses. Even when greatly outnumbered, he almost always ends up leaving his opponents with considerably less blood and testosterone by the time he's done with them. But thankfully, it's because of his superhuman fighting talent that the Roadhouse didn't fall into the hands for a bad guy within the first 10 minutes of either movie. True. But yeah, you want to get an action movie kick? I highly recommend Dalton over any Liam Neeson or Dwayne Johnson role any day. But I digress. Does Patrick Swayze or Jake Gyllenhaal make for the better portrayal of Dalton? I will say that it was probably the hardest choice to make with these films because Swayze and Gyllenhaal both totally nail the character performance-wise, especially when delivering all his awesome one-liners.
Being called a cocksucker and personal?
It's 2 nouns combined to elicit a prescribed response.
I wonder if somebody calls my mama a whore.
Is she?
Well, who the fuck are you, Mr. Smiley?
Mr. Smiley?
Yeah. You stupid? I've been punched in the face too many times.
Honestly, it's probably the punching thing.
You don't have the right temperament for the trade.
What am I supposed to do?
There's always barber college.
If you cause trouble to the wrong people, you could get hurt, or worse.
None of this is covered in my Fred the Tree book.
But writing-wise, I'm probably gonna get some hate for saying this, but I think Jake Gyllenhaal's Dalton was more developed, especially with the character's backstory. Both Daltons are revealed to have killed a man, something that plagues him to this day, but the original's pretty vague about the details, only implying that it probably wasn't self-defense like Dalton insisted. The remake gives us the full scoop, namely that Dalton used to be a respected UFC fighter, and the guy he killed was actually his opponent/good friend, who he killed when he got a bit carried away with his punching. How he avoided prison time is never revealed, but my guess is that he simply used his epic Dalton fighting skills to break free from the cops restraining him and threatened to whoop their asses if they gave him trouble. Again, a lot of times...
I mean, I get it, but I don't know. I feel like it happens in the ring. You lose yourself in the moment, so maybe accidental homicide? I don't know. I mean, you got me. But again, with action movies, you gotta have implausibility. Otherwise, I think for most of us, we agree, he'd probably be in jail by now. Anyway.
Less is more, but given death was involved here, I don't feel this approach works well. I think that we should know the full story so that we can be sure whether or not we want to root for this guy. It also helps that the remake's Dalton seems a lot more evidently remorseful about what he did. Granted, he did exploit this before landing the bouncer job by pretending to take on wrestling champions who remember said incident and are too chicken to fight him, resulting in him getting the prize money by default. But he also was about to commit suicide by train flattening in this version before the head of the Roadhouse made him the job offer. He initially refused, but thought that maybe being a bouncer would be a bit better than being a pancake after all. And whereas Dalton is only confronted about this a couple times in the original, we see him asked about it a lot more in the remake, especially by the villains, not to a point where it feels forced down your throat. but enough to see that Dalton is dealing with some pretty heavy psychological torture here.
I mean, when you
So
accidentally
because
kill
of
a
his
guy,
stronger
it
conscience,
leaves a
even though
scar.
he's no less of a badass when kicking ass, he does implement said conscience into his action scenes. Like when one of Brandt's goons comes to try and finish him off and results in him falling into a gator-infested river instead, Dalton genuinely does try to save him. Sure, he failed, but I mean, the gator was like 10 feet away from the bastard. What was he gonna do to save him? Hell, the first time we see him dealing with some tough customers who try to give him trouble, before he even lays a single punch, not only does he give them a fair warning, he confirms that they all have sufficient medical insurance and where the closest hospital is.
About like 25 minutes, I'd say. Like, depending on the traffic, what time of day. Mo, shut the fuck up.
And you think that's going the extra mile? He literally drives them to the hospital himself. Yeah, Swayze's Dalton probably would have laughed and flipped them off if they asked for help in the original. That's insane as the Roadhouse movie itself, but you know what? It's still pretty
Gotta get that human element.
I mean, come on, it's
Gotta
not
love it.
super easy to balance tough guy macho with a good heart.
True.
But Gyllenhaal actually does do it pretty damn well. Plus, while Swayze's Dalton was still a nice dude overall to those who deserved it, he could still be pretty insensitive at times. Like when the Roadhouse head makes him the job offer and says he literally paid for his plane ticket, listen to Dalton's response.
I don't fly. Too dangerous. Well, when do I expect you? I'll get there.
That's kind of douchey to say to someone who burned a couple $100 for you. Although there is one thing I've got more mixed feelings about towards the more ethical take to Dalton in the remake. In this version, instead of firing most of the bouncers for goofing off, here they're portrayed as weak-willed guys whom Dalton actually helps find their nerve to deal with troublesome customers themselves. You know, more of a mentor than a harsh supervisor. That's heartwarming, but those scenes in the original of Dalton serving those jokers their just desserts were some of my favorites in the movie. But yeah, even though I love Patrick Swayze's Dalton, and I'm probably gonna get a bunch of angry comments from Swayze fans about this verdict, but I just found Gyllenhaal a little more likable and complex, and
this
that
case,
he's the
it's
bartender
Gyllenhaal,
I
so-
have to raise my glass to
Congrats,
here.
Jake.
Point goes the new.
Oh, really?
Sorry, buddy.
But wherever there's a western town, or at least something representing a western town like in this case, there's always a dirty, rotten varmint who wants the town out of the way for whatever vile, cow pie smelling scheme he has. Only in this case, it's a
always a
corrupt
greedy
mafia
bastard.
boss SOB who can give
next
Vito
up-
Corleone a run for his money.
Even CEO.
Actually, no, not even remotely in either version, but still, which one makes for the better crime boss and minions? Let's find out with Best Villains.
Yeah, lemonade. That's villain time.
Like I said before, the main antagonist of Roadhouse is a cruel mafia boss that has the town in the
The new
palm
one
of
looks
his
like a
hands
fuckboy.
with bribery and physical
Hey, I had to
violence,
say
but
it.
hasn't gone dibs
Does
in the
look like one.
Roadhouse yet, and wants to do so at any cost and or casualty involved. In the original, he's called Brad Wesley, played by Ben Gazzara, and the remake he's called Ben Brandt, played by Billy Magnuson. Both mobsters are very similar, being smug, calculating, manipulative, ruthless, and most prominently, treating their minions like absolute dog shit.
Boss, I'm sorry. You disgust me, O'Connor. You want to know why you disgust me? No, why, boss?
Ooh!
Because you're a bleeder.
You bleed too much.
Let me talk to you for a second.
But even though both actors turned in strong asshole performances, they are executed pretty differently, and unfortunately, I feel that the remake's execution leaves something to be desired. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it, Ben Brandt was a joke of a villain. The main reason being that Magnuson executes his assholery like a snooty, entitled teenage girl.
Get the fuck out of here. Go to the house. Enjoy your fucking selves. I'll be in touch. I said keep it loose, okay? Hands loose. I get it. It's a little bouncy, but keep it nice and loose. That's all you have to do, okay? Easy, okay?
Okay, now let's all go out like for smoothies at the mall. Daddy gave me his credit card.
I wouldn't say
Yeah,
that I
that
found
sounds
Brad
about right.
Wesley really that intimidating, but he still gave off a lot more of the vibe of a heartless crime boss.
My turn. Don't you forget it.
Now look, I'm not saying that younger people can't be intimidating. My triple comparison of Tom Sawyer being a really stark example of this. And it honestly sucks, because I do feel Magnuson was just as cruel and abusive with his performance as Gazzara. But no offense to Magnuson,
again,
I guess
still,
the saying the medium is the
rich boy.
message applies
Sorry,
to
not
actors
helping.
as well. Okay, I will admit that Brandt is pretty intimidating in the climax of the movie, but for the rest of the remake, I just felt like I was seeing Sasha Waybright. You know, when she started out as just an ordinary teenage girl before transitioning into a total psycho, which we'll discuss more in my next video. But on top of that, Wesley just felt a bit more sociopathic than Brandt. Like, compare how each version attacks Dalton's ally, Emmett/Charlie, both of whom we'll go more into with the best supporting cast round.
Right.
While both set fires to their homes and beat said ally, it's clear that Wesley's arsenal definitely left more of a boom than Brandt's, if you get what I mean. And Emmett definitely seemed to take on a bit more of a messier beating than Charlie did. Speaking of which, where Brandt only destroys that business, in the original he attacks several other businesses near the Roadhouse to try and scare Dalton off, including with a frickin' monster truck.
Holy cow.
I mean, it sucks for Elizabeth's uncle, but how can you not love a villain like that? Not to mention he also sabotages the Roadhouse's booze supply, something that Brandt never did.
Plus, he actually has a villain song here, and a pretty intimidating one, too.
If you would tell me that I'm the only one that you love, life could be a dream, sweetheart.
Well, I mean, he is drinking and driving.
Now, I won't say that Brandt is completely inferior to Wesley. I do like how he has an actual motive to want to tear down the Roadhouse and all the other businesses he's buying out, namely to build a resort. Wesley just wanted to own the place to scratch the itch of his own ego from being the one place in town he couldn't get his hands on. I honestly think that's kind of childish and petty. At least Brandt actually wanted to profit from obtaining the Roadhouse. He also has a little more of a backstory, where it's revealed he's taken over the mob from his incarcerated father, who is implied to have not been the most emotionally supportive father out there, and Brandt wants desperately to impress/live up to the legacy of. Unfortunately, they don't do as much with this idea as I feel they should have, and it just kind of made me wish that this guy was our lead baddie. I mean, we never see him, and we only hear his voice twice on the phone, but everyone just seems scared shitless of him, and I wonder what it would have been like to see Dalton go up against this SOB. What about the villain's goons? Man, they're mostly just the stupid comedic minions in both movies, their main purpose being target practice for Dalton to whoop before our main honcho decides to step in himself. I guess if I had to pick though, I'd probably go with the original again. They have a lot more screen time, it just felt a bit more naturally cold-blooded and sleazy. Although I do like the idea that the love interest's father, more on her in the next round, is one of the villain's goons as well. Not only does it heighten the stakes big time in the story, but he's also the sheriff of the town apparently, really showing how much of a threat our villain is given that the cops here are on his side. But what really sold it for me was our villain's main goon, called Jimmy in the original and Knox in the remake. Well, technically in the remake he was Brandt's father's right-hand man, and he snuck a call to him from prison to help his son deal with Dalton. Anyway, both are super cold-blooded and sadistic, and unlike our villain, actually are pretty intimidating. Hell, the remake, it's actually this dude whom Dalton has the final showdown with, whereas Dalton manages to kill him shortly after he injures Emmett in the original. In the remake, it's another random dude that Dalton kills in Rage, which I know what you're thinking, kinda defeats everything the film's been building up to this point, but we'll go back to that in the best story round. Anyway, regarding this character, it was actually almost a tie. Their performances really were that awesome. Unfortunately, there was one thing about Knox that just completely ruined it for me. The first time we see him, he's literally streaking for no reason at all. I'm sorry, I know this is supposed to be a fun, corny film, but how do you expect us to have any respect for a villain if literally the first thing we see them do is be naked in public? Much as I love his performance, I just could not take him seriously after this. So yeah, even though all the actors of the villains brought their A-games, the remakes simply weren't executed in a way that I could take them seriously. Despite the more campy tone of the original, the villains there did feel more legit, so even though they didn't end up getting the Roadhouse, they did at least get the point here.
Point goes the old.
You find that funny? You find this fucking amusing? I'm not amused.
Yeah, honestly, with the old, he definitely feels more of a gangster. The newer one? Yeah, like I said earlier, fuck boy. Just saying, he looks like one, okay? Yeesh, I know I said it twice, 3 times I think now, but still, you get the idea, it's just, woof. Well, anyway, 1-1, and let's keep going.
But of course, Roadhouse isn't just a Western movie parody, it's also an action film for dudes with heavy testosterone. And what action film for dudes with heavy testosterone would be complete without a sexy action hero chick for the action lead? But of course, our female leads gotta be more than just a pair of boobs, they gotta be just as tough, badass, and funny as our lead. And I'm not just saying that to get demonetized on YouTube, I really mean that. So let's see which female lead leaves the bigger punch with Best Female Lead.
go. More romantics.
Our female lead, respectively called Elizabeth and Ellie, is respectively played by Kelly Lynch and Daniela Malchier. And as far as action movie female chicks go, both look pretty damn hot. But there's a lot more than just looks we have to go by, and Ellie wins this one big time. Elizabeth just didn't have much of a character or purpose to the story outside of being the stereotypical film sex symbol.
Again,
she's got a couple of decent lines, sure.
Earbuds?
Double dudes.
Nice place. They send a lot of business my way.
I keep talking, you're gonna go off thinking I'm a nice guy.
I know you're not a nice guy.
And they do at one point try to imply she had a tragic past where she lost her parents at a young age, and they also reveal that she had a past marriage that was hinted to have been an abusive one. But that's literally as far as that goes, and otherwise, she's mostly just there. Yes, she's quite a looker, sure, but there's very little that she does to forward the story. Ellie in the remake is another story, pun intended. For one, she has more of a personality outside of being a bland sex symbol here. Here she's portrayed as a tough cookie who you have to earn the respect of and will be worse than an aggravated polyplanter until you do. Like, compare how she and Dalton first meet. In the original, it's pretty much love at first sight, but in this version, she's all like, oh, thanks a bunch for injuring these assholes, which caused us to waste our time and resources on these folks instead of people who actually deserved medical treatment. But when Dalton works to get on her good side, she proves herself to be pretty likable.
Ex-boyfriends. But I know where he hides the spare key. I'm kidding, he lets me use it. They're not gonna find that guy's body. Crocs hide their food.
Do they teach that in kindergarten around here?
They do.
Okay, so this type of character is a tad common, shall we say. I mean, we've seen the whole bitch ass until you win their respect girl media too many times to count, especially on my show. But I personally would gladly take a cliched character over a bland sex symbol any day. Oh, that reminds me, her chemistry with Dalton feels so much more legit in this version. Not that I didn't feel that way in the original at all, but I personally felt it was a bit more, well, lustful. Not helps that Dalton in the original oodles over other women more than a few times in this version, but I actually felt a legit chemistry between these two in the remake. Like when the two are hanging out on a sandbar somewhere in the ocean, Dalton starts to realize that Ellie's legit falling for him and tries to back out, not wanting her to find out about his dark past. What's her response?
You think we don't have the internet out here? I know what happened. And you know, this is a date.
Come on, who wouldn't want a girlfriend with that level of compassion? And best of all, she feels like she has a legit purpose in the story. Like, she's actually the one who gives Dalton and the audience a majority of the exposition regarding Brant and the other gangsters. Again, it helps that her dad is actually a member of Brant's gang, and it's implied she doesn't think too highly of him, given she moved away and took her mom's maiden name when she died. Meh, still more than what we got with Elizabeth's backstory. And when he's kidnapped Dalton to persuade him to leave, she ends up rescuing Dalton from her craze pop. And even if she does end up being the damsel in distress in the climax, more on that in the best story round, she still gets to deliver some ass whooping to the villain to balance it out. Honestly, I think the biggest thing that Elizabeth contributes to the story is the third act breakup, namely when Dalton loses his cool and kills Jimmy after he hurts Emmett. And as far as third act breakups go, it's done relatively effectively, where Dalton has to see how his violent, thoughtless actions can have social consequences in addition to physical, but she also has this pretty intense line when she's trying to talk Dalton out of it prior.
What are you gonna win? Who's this for anyway? You doing it for them? You think you're gonna save these people from Brad Wesley? Well, who's gonna save them from you?
Ooh, burned, bro.
Literally.
But she conveniently decides to forgive him right during the big showdown with Wesley with no build-up whatsoever. So yeah, despite her awesome looks and playing something of a legit purpose in the third act, Ellie looked awesome, played an important part throughout the entire movie, and had an actual personality. So when looking at a bland sex symbol cliche and a tough action girl cliche, I think the second cliche is the one I'm gonna have to raise my glass to.
Point goes the new.
Now get out of here.
Nice job.
But as testosterone heavy as Dalton is, no one can take down a whole freaking mafia mob all by themselves.
Gotta have your ally.
Even though Dalton can most times, since
Let's
he
see who's
can't
the best of the
always,
gang.
Let's call in reinforcements with best supporting cast.
Nope. That's the hell.
By the way, if you notice the constant amphibia music and references in this video, it's because I'm just really excited to do the review. So, when looking at the supporting cast of both Roadhouse movies, I suppose it's fitting that we start with the head of the Roadhouse and the one who gave Dalton his bouncer job to begin with. In the original, he's called Frank Tillman, played by Kevin Tighe, and the remake, the character is called Frankie. No, not that Frankie. Plus, the character is female in this version. No, not that Frankie either. This isn't Frankie Foster, it's Frankie... well, her last name isn't revealed, but she's played by Jessica Williams. When it comes to both managers, Frankie wins this one big time. For one, her writing is much funnier.
Look, at least let me text you my number.
Oh, I don't have a phone, so...
I'll write it down on a pen and paper, just like our ancestors did.
That's my uncle.
Really? Just kidding. That's my uncle.
Not that Frank didn't have some good bits too, but he just didn't seem to have as much personality. That he kind of felt a bit like a pushover. I get that he desperately needs Dalton's help to lay down the law of the Roadhouse and keep Wesley from snatching it from him, but he pretty much just lets Dalton have complete control of the place and doesn't do much to help him or even further the story. Hell, he almost gives in to the threats of Wesley to rehire his nephew whom Dalton had fired and instead let go of Dalton. Of course, Dalton will have none of that, but still. Frankie, on the other hand, felt a lot more assertive and authoritative. Even though she still gives Dalton a big say in how things run in her establishment, she still has an in-control feel to her. Like when the villain tried to intimidate her, instead of submitting to him like Frank did, she just insulted his pimp outfit. Hell, in this version, she's not intimidated into almost firing Dalton and he convinces her otherwise. Here, Dalton almost quits and she pleads with him to stay, apologizing that she forgot to mention that her bar was the target of a mob war. On top of that, listen how polite she is when she declines letting Dalton use her car to drive the biker getting to the hospital near the beginning.
You got a car I could borrow?
I do, yeah, but not for them.
Oh, come on, these guys need medical attention.
Oh, yeah? I don't give a shit.
It's clear that even though she does still need Dalton's help to deal with her baddie, she's not completely helpless without him. But despite this one point for the remake, I actually prefer the rest of the supporting cast in the original. Why? Well, let's look at the person who the villain burns the house up and beats senselessly to scare Dalton off. In the original, it's an elderly farmer named Emmett who rents out Dalton's barn to reside at, and the remake, she's a spunky 17-year-old girl named Charlie whose pop owns a bookstore. Just for the record, Dalton in the remake lives in Frankie's houseboat. Anyway, both are good-hearted and willing to help Dalton out in any way they can, but I personally like Emmett a little better. Even if he doesn't have as much screen time, he's just such a naturally sweet and likable guy.
Calling me sir is like putting an elevator in an outhouse. Don't belong. I'm Emmett.
He's kind of like a wise old grandfatherly figure to our hero, and given how raunchy the majority of the cast is, it is kind of nice to have a kind elderly moral figure for Dalton. Plus, the original has a lot more side characters. In the remake, it's really just Frankie and Charlie, but in the old, we get to see many more of the business owners who are at the mercy of Wesley and his goons, as well as how he's basically destroying their businesses in his siege on the Roadhouse. We even see them collaborating to try and figure out what to do about Wesley at one point, but being at a complete loss for ideas. There's also a musician at the Roadhouse who's an old friend of Dalton's. Not too much purpose to the story, but he is still supportive. But what really sold it for me with the original was just 2 words. Wade Garrett. He's Dalton's longtime BFF and the guy who trained him. And yes, as an even better fighter than he is. Just look at how he's introduced. When Dalton tries to deal with Wesley's goons who are attempting to intercept the place's whiskey supply, it astonishingly seems like Dalton has finally met his match. But then Garrett comes to the rescue and whoops the asses of the SOBs good and hard, making it clear that he's the Miyagi and Dalton is Daniel. Hell, Dalton had originally suggested that Frank hire him to be the lawman in the Roadhouse, but Frank was skeptical about his relatively old age. But Dalton in the original still calls him for backup when Wesley's warfare starts to get out of hand. All I have to say is, remake, why the hell did you cut this character? He is just freaking awesome. Besides being pretty cool to actually see the guy Dalton learned his combat skills from, the two have such great connection, and Garrett's honestly got a great personality. Sure, like Dalton, he's cynical, snarky, and more than a little rugged, but it's clear that he's as close with Dalton as platonically possible.
I'll tell you something else. You taught me as much as I ever taught you. I love you, mijo.
For the record, the context of the scene is he's trying to talk Dalton out of committing murder like Elizabeth would a bit later. That said, though, this was his previous attempt.
I ought to stop telling you what to do. Maybe I ought to kick your ass.
But most of all, he plays a very big part in Dalton's character development, which we'll discuss more in the next round. So yeah, Wade may have stopped Dalton from killing Wesley, but Jimmy is not so lucky. And naturally, Wesley wants payback on Dalton for killing his right-hand man. So he tells him he's gonna flip a coin, and heads Elizabeth dies, and tails it's Garrett's. Again, this is more for the next round, but this loss, tragic as it is a big part in helping Dalton grow, which really sucks that the remake cut this character. So for this reason, and having a greater amount of, and generally more memorable side characters, it's Dalton's backup here that I have to deem more reliable.
Ghost the old.
Literally, who gives a shit?
Apparently you don't. Gotta love the sensei.
And now the score all tied. Let's get into the meat and all this and determine the winner of this barroom brawl with best story.
Alright, final round. Let's wrap it up. Who wins? Go!
When it comes to which version had the better story, I'll admit it was a bit hard for me to decide. Again, I never got to invest in either movie, though that may be in part because I'm not really much of a sucker for the genre this movie was spoofing, namely westerns. But they did at least hold my attention with their awesome action and fairly likable characters. But it's kind of hard to say which story is better, because I feel I've covered most of how I feel about both stories already with the other character rounds, and for much of what I have left to talk about, it seems kind of like a tie, especially regarding the atmosphere. Like, the original's action may have been a little more bloody and violent, but the remix was definitely more exhilarating and a little better choreographed. And the original may have definitely been more campy and slightly more charmingly cheesy, but the tropical Florida setting of the remake was definitely more memorable than the Jasper, Missouri setting of the original.
Yeah, I kinda like
no
the Florida
offense to
setting.
those of you living in
Sorry,
Missouri,
guys.
plus it's also sentimental value for me, given my grandparents lived in Florida. So is it a tie? I thought about that first, but after a very deep and lengthy contemplation, my final decision is that the original Roadhouse is the better film overall.
Yeah,
I bet some of you were expecting me to like the remake better, given that it gave much more for our two leads. And when I watched the remake for the first time,
no
I
side
thought I was going
characters
to give
this
it the
time.
win too. The tragic past with Dalton's incident was much more developed and engaging, but ultimately, the most important part of a story is what it leads up to, and, well, let me ask you all something. From what I've shared with you so far, what do you think is the overall message of the story Roadhouse?
The only message in that movie is that every problem in life can be solved by kicking.
True, but I think the message it wants to give is that physical combat should be used for defense rather than cold-blooded vengeance, or if you're just in a rage state of mind in general. And ultimately, murder is never the answer, and even if you somehow avoid prison, it's just going to make things worse for you than better. That's personally what I feel both movies wanted to convey. Keep in mind, though, the words wanted to. Because, yeah, to be honest, neither movie ultimately did a really good job of executing its message, but the remake honestly didn't even try. Okay, so let's look at the third acts of both movies. In both versions, after our villain sets fire to the home of and injures one of Dalton's good friends, Dalton loses his cool and relapses into his murder phase on one of the villain's minions, although it's a different one in each version. In the original, Elizabeth dumps Dalton's ass and won't go with him even when he warns her that Wesley's going to try and kill her. I know that the third act breakup isn't a very popular story trope, but I have seen certain movies do it pretty well, especially if its point is to help the protagonist learn from the pain and undergo character development from it. And that does seem to be what happens here. On top of that, his actions cost him not only his girlfriend, but also his BFF, when Wesley ends up murdering him as payback. What happens after Dalton commits his murder in the remake? Well, Dalton goes home and has another nightmare sequence remembering the night he lost control at the arena, and seems to have some regret about his relapse, but immediately brushes off as he proceeds to knock out one of the corrupt sheriff's deputies, frames him for the crime, and steals a chunk of Brandt's illegal cash that he had on him. Yeah,
that's overcool.
Not a good start.
Nope.
Now, failed attempts at morals aside, the climaxes of both movies are really damn exciting. In the remake, Ellie's pop reveals that Brandt kidnapped her and will kill her if Dalton doesn't give back the money he took. So he complies, borrowing Ellie's ex's boat to get to the yacht, only to learn that it was a trap and Ellie was never kidnapped to begin with. Until Brandt reveals that he actually did, since he didn't know if he could actually trust the sheriff.
Ooh, another double cross.
What the fuck, babe?
And then we got a bomb going off on the yacht, Dalton having to find Ellie on the ship as it starts to submerge, then working together to get out of it, an epic boat chase with both leads giving some ass kicking to our villain, and again, Dalton takes on Knox rather than Brandt in the big final showdown, whom Knox ultimately snaps the neck of when he tires of his bitching. The original final showdown with the villain is very good too, but in a different sort of way. It relies more on suspense and tension rather than exhilaration. We got Dalton sitting his car on autopilot to distract the blockade outside Wesley's mansion, his goons searching around the place for Wesley like he's Mike Myers bound to pop out at them at any second, and he gives them all some good jump scares and kill most of them in some pretty bloody fighting scenes. And all leads to a pretty intimidating showdown with Wesley, who feels more or less evenly matched with Dalton for a lot of it.
I think
a
it's
little bit of a genre change, sure, but it's so well done, I honestly don't give a shit.
Fair.
But naturally, Dalton eventually gains the upper hand, and just when he's about to let the SOB have it, he pauses, clearly remembering that killing is what got him here to begin with. And Dalton decides that he is going to learn something, and as kind of reverse karma, Elizabeth immediately comes in and forgives him. But when Wesley's about to not repay his kindness, he ends up getting shot anyway, by the managers whose business is Wesley wrecked. So, the moral is, don't murder someone yourself, because someone else might do it for you, and you won't be at the risk of going to prison. I mean, you could make the argument they were just trying to save Dalton, but the original does make it pretty clear that was more so a vengeance towards Wesley. But since Dalton didn't do it, he's morally in the clear and gets a happy ending with Elizabeth, while the Roadhouse becomes a prosperous establishment now that Wesley's threat is embellished. The remake's ending is... well, I actually find it kinda interesting. In that version, after Dalton supposedly kills Knox, note the word supposedly since it's revealed he survived, Ellie and her pop arrive, the latter of which agreeing to cover Dalton's ass if he agrees to leave town, while Ellie just stares at him in shock and tells him to leave as well. All Dalton can say to her is sorry, and she's never seen again. And Dalton makes a melancholy departure, with it being implied that the damages he and the villains caused to the Roadhouse are more than Frankie can afford. But he does leave behind the illegal cash he took from Brand to help Charlie and her pop with their business. Now this honestly could have made a great contrast to the original. In that version, Dalton does the right thing and most of the good guys live happily ever after. He gets the girl and the Roadhouse is a booming success. In the remake, Dalton makes the wrong choice and thus it costs him his girl for good, and the place he tried so hard to protect is very likely gonna go under. Here's the problem though, they just keep everyone's feelings way too vague. It's not clear whether or not Dalton was truly remorseful for completely relapsing into his violent tendencies, or if Ellie really wanted him to leave because she was angry and disappointed with his actions, or she just wanted him to be safe in case Brandt's pop wanted vengeance. I know that leaving feelings up to interpretation can make a story all the more engaging, but not when you're trying to deliver a moral, and it's just not clear enough to say with certainty what the intent was. And just to clarify, I still recommend the remake, because it is still a decent action flick as is. But even though it seemed like it was going to execute the story's message better, it ended up forfeiting at the last second. And even though the execution of the message in the original was a bit questionable, I have no doubt that it was better done. So I gotta go with the crown on this one and say that for doing the most important part of the story right, the story of the original Roadhouse is the one I've gotta give the
Congrats, Lazy.
Point goes the old, the winner of this epic barroom brawl.
I'm afraid of what happens when somebody pushes me too far.
So what do you say, guys? Have I convinced y'all I'm a big masculine tough ass guy yet?
No. Yep.
Okay, so this jackass facade was a total bust.
Think.
With that said, guys, just because some changes don't work out doesn't mean change should be avoided altogether, because it actually can be very helpful in many ways, which I'm going to be going into even more detail with my next video. So I hope you guys hop on to see that later, and until then, peace out.
Yeah, you ain't wrong. And honestly, I have to agree. The original really turned it around with the ending. Because, let's be real, the fact that he just, like, relapsed like that and he had to leave town and, well, basically everything's gone to hell. I'm not surprised it went like that, but let me know what you guys think. Till next time, see ya.